February 1st, 1944. Cisterna di Littoria, Italy. Private First Class Alton Knappenberger was about to make the worst tactical decision any soldier could make, and it would save over 200 American lives. He lay face down in frozen Italian mud, watching 3 German MG-42 machine guns tear his company apart from positions 85 to 120 yards away. The Browning automatic rifle in his hands weighed 20 pounds loaded. He had maybe 20 rounds left in the magazine. His wool uniform already had 3 fresh bullet holes from rounds that missed him by inches, one so close it kicked frozen mud directly into his teeth. The wooden stock of his bar had a splintered groove where a 7.92 mm German round struck wood instead of his skull. Military doctrine in 1944 was crystal clear: seek cover, stay low, never expose yourself to concentrated enemy fire. Every field manual, every training instructor, every combat veteran would tell you the same thing. Alton Knappenberger was about to do the exact opposite. He was going to crawl to the highest point on the battlefield, a small knoll completely exposed to every German gun within 300 yards, and stay there for over 2 hours. He was 20 years old. A pig farmer and deer hunter from Spring Mount, Pennsylvania. He had 0 confirmed kills before this morning. By 1400 hours, he would personally account for approximately 60 German casualties and single-handedly break a counterattack that should have pushed the entire Allied beachhead into the Mediterranean Sea. His tactic was brutally simple, and it came from hunting white-tailed deer in Pennsylvania forests. If they're all shooting at me, they can't shoot at my brothers. Go high. See everything. Control the field. Become the bait. This is the story of how a rural farm boy used deer hunting logic to become what his commanding general called a one-man army, and why his action is still taught at Fort Benning Infantry School today as an example of when breaking doctrine saves lives. To understand what happened at Anzio, you need to understand the woods around Spring Mount, Pennsylvania during the Great Depression. Alton Knappenberger was born December 31st, 1923, in Coopersburg, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Deep rural country where the Depression hit like a sledgehammer and hunting wasn't sport, it was survival. His father worked whatever factory jobs he could find when he could find them. His mother raised 6 children on almost nothing. Money was so tight that ammunition was a luxury they couldn't afford to waste. Every cartridge had to count because every missed shot meant your family might go hungry that week. From age 12, Alton hunted white-tailed deer in the forests around Spring Mount. Not for recreation, for meat to get through winter. His father taught him the fundamental principle that would later save his life at Anzio: height equals visibility equals control. The technique was called the elevated stand. You built or found a position 10 to 20 feet above the forest floor, a tree stand, a ground blind on a hillside, anything that gave you elevation over the deer trails. The logic was purely tactical. Deer move on the ground. They scan horizontally for predators, other deer, humans at ground level, movement in the brush. They almost never look up. A hunter positioned above them becomes invisible while seeing everything. It's the same reason military snipers take high ground. The same reason medieval archers positioned on castle walls could dominate battlefields. Height equals control. The skill wasn't shooting, it was patience. You sat absolutely motionless for 6, 7, 8 hours without moving a muscle. One shot, one deer. The .30-30 Winchester cartridges his father used cost real money they didn't have. You didn't get second chances. You waited for the clean shot, broadside, within 100 yards, clear of brush, and then you took it. Miss, and your family went hungry. Make the shot, and you had venison for a month. Reading terrain was fundamental. Before climbing into any stand, Alton studied the forest like a general studies a battlefield. Where would the deer move at dawn? What trails did they habitually use? Where would they feed? Where would they bed down during midday? The stand went in the optimal position to observe all approaches simultaneously. The hunter controlled the geometry of the encounter before the deer even knew they were in danger. This wasn't sport. This was cold mathematical calculation wrapped in patience and precision. Wait. Watch. See everything from elevation. Control the field. One shot. The same calculation that would save him at Anzio, except instead of deer, it would be German machine gun crews. Before the war, Alton worked on a pig farm near Spring Mount and occasionally at local brick factories, brutal Depression-era manual labor. 10-hour days mucking pig pens, hauling 50-pound feed sacks, carrying bricks. The work built raw muscle and cardiovascular endurance. But it was those silent hours and elevated tree stands that built the tactical instincts that would matter in Italy. March 1943. Pearl Harbor had happened 16 months earlier. The Selective Service Act was grinding through every able-bodied man in America. Alton Knappenberger did not volunteer, he was drafted. The Army sent him to basic training at Fort Meade, Maryland, where they put an M1 Garand rifle in his hands and taught him to kill Germans. The Garand fired 8-round semi-automatic, weighed 9.5 pounds loaded, and was accurate to 500 yards with iron sights. It was the best infantry rifle in the world in 1943. Then they made him a bar gunner. The Browning automatic rifle M1918A2 was the squad automatic weapon, the gun that provided suppressive fire when riflemen needed to maneuver. It weighed 20 pounds loaded, more than twice the Garand. Magazine capacity was 20 rounds instead of 8. The bar had 2 rates of fire, slow at 300 to 450 rounds per minute, and fast at 500 to 650 rounds per minute. Both modes fired the same .30-06 Springfield cartridge as the Garand, which meant in theory you could share ammunition with riflemen in an emergency. The bar was heavier, slower to reload, more difficult to control on full automatic, but it delivered suppressive fire the Garand simply couldn't match. Doctrine said, use cover, stay low, conserve ammunition, fire in short controlled bursts. Alton learned the lessons. He qualified on the weapon. He did what he was told. But hunting had taught him something else entirely. Go high, see more, control the field. That lesson wasn't in any Army field manual. September 1943. The 3rd Infantry Division, nicknamed the Rock of the Marne for their heroic World War I stand, shipped to Italy. Alton was assigned to Company C, 30th Infantry Regiment. They landed at Salerno in Operation Avalanche, where the Germans nearly pushed them back into the sea on day 1. 4 months of brutal combat followed before Anzio, the Volturno River crossings, the approaches to Monte Cassino, grinding village-to-village warfare through Italian mountains in autumn rain that turned every foxhole into a swimming pool. Alton performed his duties. He carried the bar, 20 pounds of weapon plus 6 magazines, another 7 pounds of ammunition. He fired when ordered. He kept his head down. His platoon gave him the nickname Nappy. He didn't stand out. No awards, no commendations, no mentions in dispatches for exceptional bravery. He was just another 19-year-old rifleman in a rifle company, doing what was required to survive one more day in a war that seemed designed to kill everyone eventually. January 22, 1944. Operation Shingle. The Allies launched an amphibious assault at Anzio and Nettuno, 30 miles south of Rome. The strategic objective was brilliant: outflank the German Gustav Line, the fortified defensive positions anchored on Monte Cassino that had stopped the Allied advance for months, and open the road to Rome. Land behind German lines, race inland, take Rome, collapse the entire German defensive system in Italy. The landing caught the Germans completely by surprise. The beaches were lightly defended. American and British forces poured ashore with minimal casualties. For about 48 hours, the road to Rome was wide open. Allied forces could have been in Rome by January 24th. Then General John P. Lucas hesitated. Instead of exploiting the surprise and advancing immediately toward Rome, Lucas consolidated the beachhead, building up supplies and defensive positions. From a logistics perspective, it made sense. You don't want your spearhead cut off without supplies. From a tactical perspective, it was catastrophic. That hesitation gave Field Marshal Albert Kesselring exactly the time he needed to react. Within 48 hours, German reinforcements were racing south. Elite units including the Hermann Göring Panzer Division and the 3rd Panzergrenadier Division, battle-hardened troops who'd fought in North Africa, Sicily, and the Eastern Front. These weren't second-rate occupation troops. These were professional soldiers who knew how to kill. By January 30th, the Allies were trapped in a pocket 10 miles deep and 15 miles wide. The Germans held the high ground in the Alban Hills with perfect observation over every square inch of the beachhead. American and British forces were packed into a tiny perimeter, unable to advance, subjected to constant artillery fire that could hit anywhere at any time because the Germans could see everything. The beachhead that was supposed to be a dagger pointed at Rome had become a potential death trap. And the Germans were preparing to push that dagger back into Allied throats. January 30th to 31st, 1944. The Battle of Cisterna. The U.S. Rangers, elite light infantry trained for deep penetration missions, attempted to break through German lines and seize the strategic crossroads town of Cisterna di Littoria, 10 miles inland from the beaches. The attack failed catastrophically. Darby's Rangers, 2 battalions totaling 767 men, infiltrated through German lines in the pre-dawn darkness of January 30th. They got within a mile of Cisterna before the Germans detected them. Then the trap closed. German forces, including elements of the Hermann Göring Division with armored vehicles, surrounded the Rangers in open farmland. The fighting was desperate close-quarters combat. The Rangers fought all day January 30th and into January 31st, but they were surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned, with no reinforcements coming. By nightfall on January 31st, Darby's Rangers had been destroyed as a fighting force, 761 men killed or captured, only 6 escaped. The 3rd Infantry Division tried desperately to break through to relieve them but couldn't penetrate the German defenses. The disaster shocked Allied commanders. If elite Rangers could be wiped out so completely, what would happen to regular infantry? By February 1st, the Germans were preparing their counterstroke. The plan was simple and brutal: attack south from Cisterna, split the Anzio beachhead in half, then destroy the isolated Allied forces piece by piece before pushing the survivors into the sea. Company C of the 30th Infantry Regiment received their orders on the evening of January 31st, reconnaissance patrol near Cisterna. Move forward, identify German positions, assess enemy strength before the expected counterattack. Don't engage unless necessary. Just get eyes on the Germans and report back. Alton Knappenberger packed 6 magazines for his bar, 120 rounds total, and tried to sleep in frozen mud. February 1st, 1944. 0530 hours. Company C moved out in a dispersed line across open farmland near Cisterna. Approximately 200 men advancing slowly in the pre-dawn darkness. The terrain was brutally exposed: flat agricultural fields, recently harvested wheat, stubble maybe 4 to 6 inches high, no trees, minimal cover except shallow depressions in the ground. Natural folds in the earth barely 12 inches deep. The soil was semi-frozen. February in central Italy meant temperatures around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Rain had fallen for days, turning the ground into thick, viscous mud that sucked at boots with every step. The patrol's objective was straightforward: advance 300 meters forward, identify German positions and strength, then withdraw to report before the German counterattack materialized. Simple reconnaissance. Don't pick a fight. Just gather intelligence and get out. Alton walked on the right flank of the formation, bar in his hands, safety off, scanning constantly. His hunter's instincts were screaming. Something was wrong. The field was too open. Too quiet. Where were the Germans? They had to be out there. You don't lose 761 Rangers in a town and then just leave the approaches undefended. 0545 hours. The first MG-42 opened fire. The sound was unmistakable, a high-pitched ripping sound at 1,200 rounds per minute, like an electric saw cutting through sheet metal. The German machine gun fired from a camouflage position approximately 85 yards ahead. The first burst killed 3 American soldiers instantly. The rest of Company C hit the dirt, diving for whatever cover existed, which was almost nothing. Just shallow depressions that barely concealed the prone man. Then the second MG-42 opened fire from the left, maybe 100 yards out. Then the third from the right, 120 yards distant. Perfect crossfire. The patrol was caught in a killing zone, pinned, unable to advance or retreat. Every movement drew fire. The MG-42s fired in alternating, disciplined bursts, 5 to 7 seconds of fire, 3 to 4 seconds to adjust aim or swap barrels, then fire again. Constant, unrelenting pressure. 5 more men were hit in the first 15 minutes. One soldier tried to crawl to a wounded comrade screaming 20 yards away. The MG-42 gunner tracked his movement and fired. The soldiers scrambled back, abandoning the wounded man who eventually stopped screaming. The patrol was completely immobilized. The lieutenant was shouting orders, but nobody could move without getting shot. 0600 hours. 15 minutes of paralysis. Alton lay in a shallow depression, bar pointed forward, breathing mud. He studied the field the way he studied Pennsylvania forests before a deer hunt. The MG-42 positions weren't directly visible. German crews knew their business, but he could detect their locations. First nest, 85 yards ahead. He saw muzzle flash and smoke. Second nest, 100 yards to the left. He could see the barrel moving as they tracked targets. Third nest, 120 yards to the right. That one he could only hear, no visual confirmation. All 3 positions were in low ground or behind sandbags, barely above field level. From his prone position, Alton could barely see them, which meant he couldn't effectively engage them. But 60 yards ahead of his position, there was a small knoll, a mound of earth maybe 6 to 8 feet higher than the surrounding field. The only elevated point visible in 360 degrees. No trees, no cover, completely exposed to fire from every direction. But from up there, he would see everything. The thought formed in his mind like a hunter planting a stalk. From that knoll, I see where they are. They'll see me, but I'll see them better. I become the deer. They become the hunters. But if they're all shooting at me, they're not shooting at my brothers. Alton turned to the soldier pressed into the mud next to him. I'm going to that knoll. The soldier stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You're insane. You'll be killed in 10 seconds. Alton replied, they can't kill all of us if they're shooting at me. The soldier said, Nappy, don't. But Alton was already starting to crawl. The lieutenant was 20 meters behind, couldn't see what Alton was doing through the smoke and confusion. Alton didn't ask permission. He didn't wait for orders. He improvised. 0605 hours. Alton began crawling toward the knoll, 60 yards away. The bar, 20 pounds of steel and wood, dragged alongside his right hand. His elbows pulled his body forward through the frozen stubble. The semi-frozen mud cut his hands, soaked through his wool uniform. The MG-42s were firing over the field, focused on the main American positions. They hadn't detected him yet. He was just one man, moving slowly, staying low. They were focused on larger threats, the clumps of pinned American soldiers returning sporadic rifle fire. 10 yards. He crawled past a dead American soldier, face down in the dirt, blood frozen in the mud around his head. Alton didn't stop. An MG-42 burst swept the area, bullets kicking up dirt 6 feet to his left. Alton froze completely, not even breathing. 10 seconds. The MG-42 stopped firing, crew reloading. Alton continued crawling. 20 yards. 30 yards. 40 yards. The Germans still hadn't detected his movement. At 50 yards, Alton reached the base of the knoll. The ground began sloping upward. Almost there. He crawled the last 6 to 8 feet up the slope. Now he was above the level of the field. If the Germans looked now, he was dead. But they didn't look. They were still firing at the pinned platoon below. Alton reached the top of the knoll and positioned himself prone, bar forward. From this position, he had nearly 360-degree observation over the flat field. He could see everything. MG nest number 1, 85 yards ahead. 3 men visible. MG-42 on tripod mount, low sandbags, good field of fire covering the American positions. MG nest number 2, 100 yards to the left. 2 men visible, 1 feeding ammunition belt, 1 firing. MG nest number 3, 120 yards to the right. Only the barrel visible, position heavily camouflaged behind earthworks and vegetation. Behind him, 200 American soldiers pinned across 150 meters of front, unable to move, taking casualties. Alton made his tactical decision, engage the closest target first. He switched the bar selected to slow, 300 to 450 rounds per minute. More control, less wasted ammunition. This wasn't spray and pray. This was deer hunting with a machine gun. 0610 hours. Alton aimed at the MG-42 gunner in nest number 1, 85 yards distant. He controlled his breathing the way his father taught him at age 12. Exhale slowly. Hold it. Squeeze the trigger smoothly, don't jerk. The bar fired 4 rounds in 1 second, put 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 put. The gunner fell backward. The second crewman, the ammunition feeder, turned to see what happened. Alton fired again. 3 rounds. The second crewman fell. The third man ran. MG-42 number 1 was silenced. The Germans in the other positions saw the shooting. They searched for the source. 5 seconds later, they identified Alton on the knoll. Both remaining MG-42s swung toward him. A storm of bullets. The 7.92mm rounds snapped through the air around Alton with supersonic cracks, that distinctive crack 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 sound of bullets passing close enough to hear. Bullets struck the ground near him, kicking up frozen mud. 1 round passed 6 inches from his head, close enough that he felt the pressure wave. Another tore through his uniform sleeve, ripping the fabric but not touching skin. A third round struck the wooden stock of his bar, gouging a deep groove in the wood. If his hands had been positioned 3 inches higher, the round would have taken his fingers off. Alton rolled 6 feet to his right, changing position on the knoll. Movement equals survival. Deer detect static shapes, so do machine gunners. Germans aim at where you were, not where you are. Keep moving, even if just a few feet. Never fire twice from the same position. His father's words, the buck looks where he heard the shot. Be somewhere else when he looks. 0625 hours. 2 German panzer grenadiers advanced from the left, moving in tactical bounds, crouched runs of 15 to 30 feet, then drop, then run again. Professional infantry tactics. They were trying to flank the knoll, get close, use grenades to kill Alton. Each man carried 3 or 4 Model 24 steel hand grenade stick grenades, the potato mashers GIs feared because of their blast radius. Distance, 40 yards, then 30 yards, then 25, then 20. Alton watched them through his sights. He didn't fire. Hunter's patience. Wait for the clean shot. Don't fire too early and waste ammunition. Let the target come closer. At 20 yards, he fired a burst of 6 rounds. The first grenadier fell, struck in the chest, dead before he hit the ground. The second grenadier's arm came up. The stick grenade left his hand in a tumbling arc. Alton fired again, 4 rounds. The second grenadier fell. The grenade exploded 50 feet away, not close enough to cause damage. 2 more Germans dead. The tactic was sound, but they'd underestimated the bar's effective range and Alton's marksmanship. 0640 hours. MG-42 nest number 2, 100 yards to the left, was still active, still firing bursts at the knoll. Alton switched the bar selector to fast, 500 to 650 rounds per minute. Greater volume of fire for suppression at longer range. He fired a burst of 10 rounds in 1.5 seconds. Tracer rounds, phosphorus-tipped bullets that left a visible burning trail, marked every 5th round. The tracers streaked toward the German position like angry hornets. The objective was suppression, force the crew to take cover, disrupt their firing rhythm. The MG-42 stopped firing temporarily. The crew ducked behind sandbags. Alton fired a second burst, 8 rounds. He saw one German fall backward, struck by at least 2 rounds. The MG-42 tried to resume firing, but the crew was disorganized. Only one man left operating the weapon. Alton fired a third burst, 6 rounds. The MG-42 stopped permanently. Nest number 2 was silenced. 2 out of 3 nests eliminated. Estimated German dead so far, 8 to 10 men in approximately 30 minutes. 0645 hours. Alton checked his current magazine. 3 rounds left. He had 2 full magazines remaining on his belt, 40 rounds. Total ammunition available, 43 rounds. But MG nest number 3 was still active, plus unknown numbers of German infantry in support positions. Ammunition was becoming a critical problem. The bar barrel was hot to the touch, approximately 150 to 200 rounds fired in 35 minutes. The bar had no water cooling system like the M1917 Browning machine gun. Overheating was a real risk if he continued sustained fire. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline and the physical strain of controlling 20 pounds of violently recoiling weapon. His shoulders ached from the bar's recoil pounding his right shoulder socket. His mouth was dry as sand. His canteen was with his pack, left behind when he crawled to the knoll. Alton spat to wet his mouth. The taste was gunpowder residue and frozen Italian mud. 0650 hours. A new threat appeared. Alton saw 30 to 40 German soldiers advancing from the rear, a full assault platoon, probably from the 3rd Panzergrenadier Division. Objective, overrun the knoll and eliminate the American gunner, disrupting the entire counterattack. They advanced in a staggered line, moving by bounds in textbook infantry tactics. Half the unit advanced 30 to 50 feet and stopped, providing covering fire. The other half advanced, then they switched roles. Initial distance, 150 yards. Then 120 yards. Then 100 yards. Alton made a rapid tactical decision. Ignore MG nest number 3, it was 120 yards away, too far for effective bar fire against a fortified position with his remaining ammunition. Focus on the infantry. They were closer, a more immediate threat, and infantry in the open are vulnerable targets. At 100 yards, Alton opened fire. Selector on fast, 500 to 650 rounds per minute. Short bursts to conserve ammunition. 4 rounds. Shift aim. 4 rounds. Shift aim. Focus on exposed targets. Don't waste bullets on difficult shots. Germans began to fall. First man hit in the chest dropped like a sack of grain. Second man hit in the leg fell screaming. Third, fourth, fifth, 5 or 6 Germans down in 30 seconds. The rest sought whatever cover existed, diving into shallow depressions or behind the bodies of dead comrades. At 80 yards, Alton continued firing. Any movement drew a burst of 3 to 4 rounds. A German raised his head to locate the firing position. Burst. He fell. Another tried to crawl forward. Burst. He stopped moving. 4 or 5 more Germans down. The assault platoon could not advance against concentrated automatic weapons fire from an elevated position with clear fields of fire. A German officer, probably a lieutenant, started shouting orders in German. The assault platoon retreated in good order, dragging some of their wounded. Estimated German casualties in this engagement, 10 to 12 men. Alton was still on the knoll, still alive, now completely out of ammunition. 0710 hours. Alton squeezed the bar trigger. Click. Magazine empty. He swapped to his last magazine, 20 rounds left. That was all. No reserve ammunition. MG nest number 3, 120 yards to the right, was still firing sporadically at the knoll. Bullets continued striking around his position. One round hit 6 inches to his left, the impact crater described in the official Medal of Honor citation. Another round struck the bar stock again, splintering more wood. Another tore through his uniform sleeve, ripping fabric but not breaking skin. 3 bullet holes in his uniform, none in his body. 20 rounds remaining. MG nest number 3 still active. The Germans would send another assault wave any minute. Alton needed more ammunition immediately. He identified the dead American soldier he'd passed during his initial crawl, 50 feet down the slope from the knoll. The dead man had an M1 Garand and a cartridge belt. Alton faced a choice: descend the knoll into full exposure and retrieve ammunition, or stay and run out when the Germans attacked again. Certain risk now versus certain death later. He chose to move. 0713 hours. Alton began crawling down the knoll toward the body, 50 feet away. The German MG-42 detected movement immediately and opened fire. Bullets tore up the ground around him, stitching lines of impacts across the frozen earth. At 15 feet, a German stick grenade exploded 15 feet to his right, the shockwave, the spray of frozen mud and shrapnel fragments in his face. He continued crawling, hands and elbows pulling him forward. At 30 feet, an MG-42 burst past centimeters above him, so close he heard the supersonic crack of each individual bullet. At 50 feet, he reached the body. He turned the dead soldier over, rigor mortis hadn't set in yet, the body was still warm, and searched frantically for bar magazines. None. The soldier had an M1 Garand, not a bar. The Garand used N-block clips, 8 rounds per clip. The bar used 20-round box magazines. Same ammunition, .30-06 Springfield, but completely different feed systems. Alton would have to manually empty the Garand clips and reload his bar magazines by hand, under continuous machine gun fire. He removed the cartridge belt from the corpse, 6 clips, 48 cartridges total. The MG-42 continued firing, bullets striking within feet. Alton's hands were shaking violently from adrenaline and the physical impact of incoming fire. He grabbed the first clip, ejected 8 cartridges into his palm, picked up an empty bar magazine, began inserting rounds one by one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Grabbed the second clip, 910111213141516. His hands were shaking too badly to load all 20. 16 rounds would have to do. An MG-42 burst crack nearby, bullets striking 3 feet to his left. Screw it! Good enough. He shoved the partially loaded magazine into the bar, stuffed the remaining clips, approximately 32 rounds, into his uniform pockets, and crawled back up the knoll. 0716 hours. Alton was back at the top. Magazine loaded with 16 rounds, plus approximately 32 more rounds and loose clips in his pockets. Total, 48 rounds. Enough to keep fighting. 0720 to 1400 hours. The pattern repeated for over 6 more hours. Germans attempted to flank the knoll. Alton fired controlled bursts. Germans retreated, regrouped, tried again. Every 15 to 20 minutes, a new German probe. Small groups of infantry trying to approach under covering fire from the remaining MG nest. Each attempt failed. Each attempt cost German lives. The mathematics were brutal. The Germans needed to close within grenade range, 20 yards, to kill Alton. The bar was effective to 300 yards. Alton could see them approaching long before they could hurt him. His elevated position gave him the same advantage he had hunting deer in Pennsylvania forests. He saw everything. They saw him but couldn't approach without being shot. At 0920 hours, MG nest number 3 finally went silent. The crew either evacuated their position or were killed by American artillery fire directed by observers who could finally move now that the initial pins were broken. The historical record doesn't specify which. Alton reloaded his magazines 3 more times using the Garand clips, each reload taking 2 to 3 dangerous minutes. Estimated total rounds fired over 7+ hours, 200 to 250. Alton lost count of how many Germans he killed after the first hour. His focus wasn't scorekeeping, it was survival, minute by minute. The physical toll was enormous. His shoulders felt like they'd been beaten with hammers from the bar's recoil. His hands were cut and bleeding from the frozen mud and sharp metal edges of magazines. His mouth was so dry his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. The smell was overwhelming: gunpowder, cordite, blood, frozen mud, his own sweat despite the cold. The taste of copper pennies from adrenaline. The ringing in his ears from hundreds of rounds fired without hearing protection. But he stayed on that knoll. Because every German shooting at him wasn't shooting at the 200 American soldiers pinned in the field below. Every German probe he broke was one less attack on his brothers. The hunter's logic: control the field from elevation. See everything. Wait. Shoot. Survive. 1,400 hours. The American company, pinned for over 8 hours, was finally able to move. With the MG-42 nests silenced and the German assault momentum broken, soldiers advanced cautiously or retreated to more defensible positions with their wounded. Some moved forward to consolidate the terrain Alton had held. Others fell back with casualties that had been lying in the mud for hours, slowly bleeding out. An officer, probably the company commander, shouted toward the knoll, "Nappy, get down here." Alton fired his last rounds to cover his withdrawal, then descended from the knoll. He walked back toward American lines on legs that barely functioned, adrenaline crash hitting like a physical blow. His uniform had 3 confirmed bullet holes. The bar stock was splintered in 2 places. The barrel was still hot enough to burn skin. Soldiers looked at him in silence. Nobody spoke for 30 seconds. They'd watched him on that knoll for hours, one man against an entire German counterattack, thinking every minute would be the minute he died. Finally, someone said quietly, "You held them for 8 hours. Alone." Alton didn't respond. Exhaustion had stolen his voice. A medic checked him for wounds. Nothing. Not a scratch. 3 bullet holes in his uniform, none in his body. The splintered bar stock had absorbed at least 2 rounds that would have hit his hands or face. Constant movement on the knoll meant German gunners were always aiming at where he'd been, not where he was. Miracle? Luck? Skill? Probably all 3 in proportions impossible to calculate. February 2nd to 3rd, 1944. Intelligence officers returned to the field near the knoll to conduct battle damage assessment. They counted German bodies and assessed evacuated wounded based on blood trails, abandoned equipment, and testimony from German prisoners captured in subsequent fighting. In front of the knoll, approximately 20 to 25 corpses. In the surrounding area, including the MG nests and approach routes, approximately 35 to 40 additional bodies or clear evidence of wounded evacuated by retreating Germans. Total, approximately 60 casualties confirmed, dead plus seriously wounded evacuated. Distribution, primarily in a 180-degree arc in front of the knoll. MG nest number 1, 85 yards, 3 dead. MG nest number 2, 100 yards, 2 to 4 dead. 2 Panzer Grenadiers attempting grenade assault, 2 dead. Assault platoon engagements, 10 to 12 dead or wounded. Other engagements throughout the day, 20 to 30 dead or wounded. The numbers were staggering for a single infantryman with a 20-round magazine weapon operating for 8 hours. For comparison, a well-trained rifleman in World War II might account for 2 to 3 enemy casualties in a major engagement. Alton Knappenberger accounted for 60. The divisional commander, Major General Lucian Truscott of the 3rd Infantry Division, called Alton Knappenberger a one-man army. Recommendation for the Medal of Honor was submitted immediately. February through May 1944. Alton continued in combat after his action at Cisterna. The 3rd Infantry Division fought to break out of the Anzio beachhead through February, March, and April, some of the most brutal close-quarters fighting of the Italian campaign. May 23rd, Operation Diadem, the breakout finally succeeded as Allied forces coordinated attacks all along the Gustav Line. June 4th, 1944, Rome was liberated. Alton entered Rome with the 3rd Infantry Division, just another dirty infantryman in a column of thousands. June 8, 1944. The Medal of Honor was presented to Private First Class Alton Warren Knappenberger by General Mark Clark, commander of 5th Army, in a ceremony near Rome with the entire regiment in formation and the regimental band playing. The official citation was read aloud, describing his actions on February 1st, positioning himself on an exposed knoll, enemy fire striking within 6 inches, crawling 15 yards under fire to obtain ammunition from a fallen comrade, single-handedly disrupting the enemy attack for over 2 hours. Alton was 20 years old. He'd been in combat for approximately 5 months. This was the first and only action for which he received formal recognition. After the ceremony, Alton was sent back to the United States. He participated in the War Bonds Tour, standard procedure for Medal of Honor recipients. He traveled to cities across America, telling his story to sell war bonds that funded the continuing war effort. For a kid from rural Pennsylvania who'd never been outside Montgomery County before 1943, it was surreal and uncomfortable. He did his duty, sold the bonds, and counted the days until he could go home. Did military doctrine change after Anzio? Not officially. Army field manuals still taught, use cover, stay low, avoid exposure. But the story of Alton Knappenberger was taught at infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, as a case study in tactical adaptation. The lessons, terrain plus situation overrides the manual. Exposure equals visibility equals control in specific circumstances. Initiative when command is paralyzed saves lives. Alton's decision was against doctrine but tactically brilliant for that specific terrain and situation. The flat Italian farmland with a single elevated knoll created unique conditions. Doctrine is designed for average situations. Exceptional situations require exceptional adaptations. The hunter from Pennsylvania understood this instinctively because he'd spent years adapting to terrain while deer hunting. The military lesson became, doctrine is a guide, not an absolute law. Understand the principles behind doctrine, then adapt to the situation you're actually in. Alton understood the principle, elevation equals visibility equals control. 1945 to 2008. Alton returned to Pennsylvania. He worked as a truck driver, then as a supervisor of an asphalt paving crew. He avoided the spotlight, rarely spoke about the war. He married, had children, grandchildren. He taught his children and grandchildren hunting and fishing, passing on the civilian skills that saved him in combat. Personal characteristics, quiet, humble, just did my job. Local veterans knew him, knew about the Medal of Honor, but Alton never boasted, never told stories unless asked. He attended some veteran reunions but preferred staying home. The war was something that happened, not something to relive constantly. June 9, 2008. Alton Warren Knappenberger died. He was 84 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. His headstone is simple, name, rank, Private First Class, Medal of Honor. No mention of 60 Germans killed. No mention of 8 hours on the knoll. Just the facts. Somewhere near Cisterna di Littoria, there is a flat field with a small knoll, 6 to 8 feet of elevation, nothing more. On February 1, 1944, that knoll was the most dangerous point in 10 square kilometers. Alton Warren Knappenberger, 20 years old, deer hunter from Spring Mount, Pennsylvania, climbed that knoll. He climbed the way a hunter climbs into a tree stand. He waited. He shot. He survived. And he saved 200 men who could not move. The logic was simple. I become the deer. They become the hunters. But if they're all shooting at me, they're not shooting at my brothers. Military doctrine says, seek cover. Stay low. Minimize exposure. Alton Knappenberger said, go high. See more. Control the field. Both are correct. Doctrine covers 95% of situations. But that remaining 5%, the unique terrain, the specific tactical problem, the moment when conventional wisdom fails, that's when understanding principles matters more than following rules. Alton understood the principle from hunting: elevation equals visibility equals control. He applied it in the worst possible situation and turned a disaster into a victory. 60 German casualties. 8 hours holding the most exposed position on the battlefield. 0 American casualties from his position during those 8 hours because every German gun was focused on him instead of his brothers. The Medal of Honor citation calls it extraordinary heroism. It was. But it was also cold tactical calculation wrapped in patience and precision, the same calculation he'd used hundreds of times waiting for deer in Pennsylvania forests. Wait. Watch. Control the field. One shot at a time. If you're still watching, here's the question I want you to think about. How many times have you followed conventional wisdom when the situation actually required something completely different? Alton Knappenberger broke every rule and saved 200 lives because he understood the principles behind the rules. Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories of soldiers who broke doctrine and won battles, hit that subscribe button. There are dozens more stories like this one, stories the military doesn't teach in basic training but should.